few people join us here as we kick this off, but I'm going to go ahead and start us. So welcome everybody. My name is Carol Peters, and I am proud to serve as the President and CEO of United Way Next. Oftentimes people will ask the question, what is United Way Next? So I want to just at the front line, share that with you. We are a community of United Way leaders, and our purpose is to make connections and make a difference. We are our member segment are retirees, alumni of the United Way, current staff, people like yourselves who are maybe tuning in today that are currently out in the field, as well as local United Ways and state associations. And so we really are excited to have you join us today for our planned giving office hours and learning session. The majority of the time together will be focused on the learning session. We will open it up for Q&A. And I guess what I'd like to do is ask you to go ahead and put your names in the chat and where you're calling in from today. And later on, we may ask you for some other information, but let's get that started. And if you have questions about United Way Next, know that at the end of the session, Caitlin will be sending out the recording link. She sends out a satisfaction survey. We really encourage you to complete that survey to help us know what we can be doing better, what you need from us. And I also want to make sure I remind everybody that we do offer through our endowment and planned giving volunteer faculty mentorships. So if you are interested in getting started and working with someone, you have questions after today and you're like, boy, I could really benefit from speaking to an individual who can provide some additional insight, know that we have additional people beyond the two that you're going to hear from today that you can get to know and work through United Way Next. You do not have to be a member of Next to be a part of any of these calls. We encourage you to share the links with your colleagues after you receive the recording if you found value in the information. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover for now. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our guest speakers for today, who are both part of our they're first of all, both United Way Next members. They are part of our volunteer faculty, and they have chosen a topic, making the ask, as the subject that they're going to speak on today. And we're just thrilled to have both of them as experienced United Way professionals that are out in the world doing great things that focus around resource development, major gifts, endowment, and planned giving. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest speakers, Rochelle, Zeidman, and Ned Montgomery. And I'll turn it over to Rochelle.
Thank you, Carol. First off, it's really great to be here today. It's a privilege, a real privilege to be part of United Way Next. And I'm thrilled to join you for this learning session, Making the Ask. I see people from as far as Hawaii to Milwaukee to all over the country, and that just makes me so happy. I'm thrilled to be here with my expert and wonderful colleague, Ned Montgomery. And I also want to thank Carol Peters and Caitlin Guest for their outstanding leadership and assistance. So let's get started. First, I want to go to the session overview. What are we going to cover today? First is the role. What's your role in making the ask? What are some current trends? I'm going to give you 2 facts and 1 bonus fact. Then we're going to go through the overview of what are the best practices in this donor cycle, how to actually make the ask, how to handle objections. Ned and I are going to do a role play, actually 2. Ned's going to be the solicitor. I'm going to be the actual donor. Then we'll do the audience Q&A, and then a really good audience sharing of best practices. Just to let you know, I'm going to focus more on the general major gift ask, and Ned is going to delve in more into the plan giving and endowment asks. So before I really get started, I wanted to share a little story. So I recently went to see a surgeon, and she told me, I told her I'm terrified of surgery, and she said, it's a good thing I'm not. So what does this joke tell us? Really, that good communications are so important, that when you're the actual solicitor, You have to have the confidence of a surgeon. You have to know the subject matter and really strike a rapport. So really your role in making the ask, you are the actual bridge between the donor and United Way. You are an educator, a communicator about United Way. You're a good listener or even a great listener. You're also, as we all are here, a real leader for impact in the community. And most important, in my opinion, you are really ethical and you inspire trust of the donor. So let's move ahead now to the next slide, the current trends. A study that was recently released on the giving environment, and this was pre-pandemic trends in charitable giving in July 2021, and it was led by Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, Dr. Una Osili. She is the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs. And the study stated that the share of American households that donate to charity has been declining, and that is since the Great Recession. And this phenomena is called donors are down, but dollars are up. So this is an important fact. And what does it mean? You know, throughout the United States, there are fewer donors now, but the gifts are becoming larger. Fact number 2, there's an important transfer of wealth. A New York Times article reported on a study by Cerulli. Cerulli is a respected wealth firm, and this is an incredible amount. $84 trillion is expected to be passed down to millennials and Gen X heirs by 2045. And I want you to guess how much of that is expected to be distributed to charities. The amount, can anyone put in an amount on the chat? Let's see what we get. Okay, I'm just going to tell you. Then the amount is $11.9 trillion, which is really 14% of that. So that's an important fact to know, because this is a huge opportunity. And the bonus fact is this. On Tuesday, Giving USA released its report, and really that tells us what are the trends in charitable giving. And that report is based on important information for all of us to know. So Tuesday, they told us that in 2022, $499 billion was donated to charities. This is the most of any country in the world. So I encourage you to read the study, and you will see the trends in terms of like information like 64% giving was by individuals, etc. So this is important for everyone to know. Next, please. Now I'm going to go through the development best cycle for donors. And this is really common practice, and it's best practice, and really it's with few exceptions. Obviously, first is the identification of your prospective donors, then the qualification. What is a potential good fit for this particular individual? You do that through in-depth research, discussions, and really an information exchange, that communication. Next is the cultivation, and that's through a series of contacts, information exchanges, and you really spend time assessing what specific interests are and what the best is in terms of the fit with the organization. Next, please. Then we continue with the solicitation of the gift. If you could go back. I think we're on slide 5. What? We're getting there. Thank you. Okay, now we're soliciting a gift. And this can be more than one contact, because a donor or prospective donor may have multiple questions, and this will then finalize the gift. And then after the gift is made, the stewardship, and that's keeping the donor engaged, informed, and really talking to them about your local United Way's impact and achievements, and especially in the areas that they are interested in. Next, please. So just to sum up, identify the prospects, qualify them, cultivate the prospects, solicit and close the gift, and then steward the donors. Now I'd like to ask Ned to join and present in terms of making the ask.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. In making the ask, if you want a donor to love your organization, you have to love the donor. It can't be a one-way street. I have many people who say, well, I don't really like this person. That is not true if you're trying to raise money. Secondly, building relationships. Individuals give to individuals and then to organizations. And the relationship that you develop will be long-lasting, and that will be helpful to your organization. You have to be passionate about your United Way. Your body language and attitude reveal a lot. Donors make assumptions about fundraisers very rapidly. Next. Most individuals do not like asking for money. Why? I think it's a fear factor. From a personal standpoint, I can remember when I used to ask a girl out on a date, if she said no, I would immediately hang up. I would make all sorts of assumptions of why she didn't like me or whatever, and never bothered to figure out that it was really her father's birthday or whatever it may have been. Fear, it should not be part of your attitude when you're asking for money. You're really asking for an investment. You're not asking for a gift. You want to say, I invite you to invest in our mission of ending, let's say, intergenerational poverty. Planned giving and endowment is different than an annual gift because it's very important to the donor that you are now becoming part of their loved ones. I remember when I went back and asked my wife, said, gee, I'll make a simple thing. I want to make a planned gift to United Way. And she looked at me and said, what are you talking about? She said, I thought we were going to give the money to the children. Well, yes, but we want to give to charity too. Well, then we have to discuss my charities also. I said, well, wait a minute, I want this to be simple. It was never simple. 6 months later, after quite an adventure, I was eventually able to make a planned gift to United Way. But a planned gift or an endowment gift will also involve the family. It's going to involve lawyers often, and it's going to involve financial advisors. You want to know your donors' philanthropic interests. What are they interested in? But the biggest problem in fundraising is procrastination. It is so easy to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go home today. I'll call that donor tomorrow, or I'll see that donor some other time. You cannot procrastinate. You always want to be proactive, not reactive. Next. Preparation. Obviously, you want to be prepared with factual information about the donor and the current situation. You can never know too much. You should rehearse before a call so that you know who is responsible for the ask. Is it the volunteer? And you should, as a minimum, meet 15 minutes before a call. I never will forget a call I was making on a donor to ask for $1 million. And we were sitting in the lobby and the senior person for United Way looked at me and said, Ned, this person's never going to do it. I said, will you do me one favor? And she said, what's that? I said, smile during the whole presentation and don't say a word because he'll read what you were thinking. So it so happened that 8 minutes later, the donor gave us $1 million and said, Ned, is that the fastest $1 million you've ever gotten? And I said, no, because it took us 3 years to ever get this gift from you. You should know your case for support. But the most important part of getting an appointment is also the hardest part. I always say, will you give me 12 minutes? Why 12 minutes? One, it captures the donor's attention. And secondly, it shows you respect their time. The hardest part, though, is you have to be specific. You have to say, I'm going to be in your area next week. What if I make a phone? What about if I stop by for 12 minutes and tell you what I'm want to discuss with you about our United Way? Well, Ned, can't we do this by telephone? No, I really have to meet with you in person. Would next Wednesday or Thursday work for you? Morning or afternoon? You want to be specific. You don't want to say, well, could we meet sometime? Person's going to say, sure, in a year or two. So you want to be very specific and say, what about next week? Was not next week. When can we meet? Next. The ask. You were really asking for a cause you want to believe, that you really believe in. Therefore, passion is important. They have to see that in you and react to that. You have to be honest and direct. And don't be shy. You're not asking for a personal loan. You're not asking for a gift. You're asking someone to join you in a cause that you believe in and hopefully they'll believe in. Judgments made about fundraising are generally superficial, and I have found over years they're generally inaccurate. We have to talk to the donor. We don't want to sit there and assume what they're thinking of. So I say, assumptions really true in all relationships are bad form. You don't know what the donor is thinking, therefore don't assume. Next. The ask itself. When you're, excuse me, 1 minute here. You're calling on a donor. So first of all, you want to park your ego, because you're not asking for yourself. So therefore you can't be either hurt or not hurt by what the donor says, whether you're praised or criticized. You're inviting them to participate in a worthy cause. You should also work on the sizzle. Think about what would the donor do when they went home and had dinner tonight. What would they say? For example, I met with a donor from a person from United Way, and they said in Philadelphia, do you realize that a child who is not reading at grade level in the 4th grade has less than 25% chance of graduating high school? Can you imagine in 4th grade having your future already determined? When calling on a donor, you should start by asking, I am privileged to work with United Way this year, and it is my opportunity to call on you. Could I meet with you next Thursday or Friday, morning or afternoon? Again, we want to be specific. 80% of getting an ask is getting a meeting. That is the most important. Next. I always like to think that no answer is one of the best things I can hear from a donor. And why do I say that? No gives you a chance to explore the donor's thinking. If you view no as a best friend, you will always then probe. I have never received a major gift that a donor did not initially say no. Never. A donor I have encouraged to give to our United Way $10 million over the years has said no to me and asked at least 10 times, sometimes saying, Ned, I've given as much as I'm going to give. He still gave more. So you want to explore why. Is it, what are they interested in? Maybe it's not your organization. Why are they interested in what they do give to? The best thing, if you want to really raise money, is to ask for advice. Gee, I understand what you're talking about. What would be your approach? We're trying to address poverty in Philadelphia. We're of the 10 largest cities, we have the highest poverty rate of any major city. How would you address these issues? What would be your approach? You also want to find the convergent point. You want to get them talking about what they're doing. Because remember, in all fundraising, you want to listen to ask. You want to listen more than you talk. You might try and probe, is the amount we're asking for too much? Or maybe it's timing. Is this a bad time of year for you? And then you want to arrange a follow-up meeting. Gee, you asked me these questions. Could I get back to you? Because I know I can find out answers. You really want to leave the meeting with an opportunity to go back to them. You don't want to think that you're going to answer all the questions at the same time. So you want to have a follow-up meeting. For one organization, though, I have to admit, after asking the donor to give 6 years in a row, which he made very major gifts, I asked him the 7th year, he smiled and looked at me and said, Ned, what part of no don't you understand? So at some point, you have to say thank you to the donor and thank you for all you're doing for the organizations for which you work. Next. I always am concerned, well, that's always good information. But I think, well, what I like to do now and have Rochelle join me is I want to role play. And I'll tell you ahead of time, we've already discussed, now I have an appointment with Rochelle. But Rochelle knows no more about the ask than what I'm about to give you. So this has not been rehearsed, so good luck. It will be spontaneous. I do not know how she'll respond, but let me give you a little bit of background. Rochelle is a longtime donor to United Way. She gives $10,000 annually. And I know her, but I don't know her well. And my goal is to get her to endow her gift. She's smiling at me. That may be a good sign or a bad sign. But anyway, Rochelle, it's wonderful to see you. I was so glad to see you and your husband at the orchestra last week. Hope you're feeling well and doing well.
Oh, I'm doing great, Ned, and it's great to see you. I look forward to talking with you all the time, and I want to hear more about what's going on at United Way. I was concerned. I read a report today, and none of the cities in the entire United States made the top 10 cities in the world. Now that really got me thinking, why is that, Ned?
Well, I ask you for 12 minutes because I want to make sure that I respect your time, Rochelle. And is 12 minutes still good for you?
12 minutes is fine. It's absolutely fine, Ned.
Okay. Our United Way has been looking at how we grow our endowment, because an endowment really, as you know, helps any organization have stability for the future. So the board has come up with a plan where we want to create a legacy society. That is where people like you, who have been major donors to United Way over the years, endow their gift. These individuals would then be, by making a gift of $250,000, that would generate $10,000 a year. So in perpetuity, you and your husband would be donors to United Way. My wife and I did do this, and we're asking others to do it. What would be your thoughts about you and your husband endowing or joining our Legacy Society?
Well, could you tell me more about the Legacy Society, Ned?
Yeah, the Legacy Society is really where we're trying to, if we look at our United Way Tocqueville Society, just take one group. If they all endowed their gift, $10,000, or if it was greater, if they endowed, that would generate about an $8 million endowment for our United Way. And it eventually would be an expectancy, but eventually, and that would help secure our United Way for the future. And I think if we can get individuals like you and your husband to join us now, it would show to the community you and we are serious about making sure our United Way is around for the future.
Yeah, does the money go to a particular program, or, how does it work?
Well, once the money is given, the money would go into our endowment. Our philosophy is that we will take 5% of the endowment funds and use that in the annual operation. And forever, when we list our Tocqueville donors, you would be listed in perpetuity as a continuing donor to United Way.
Now, has anyone else joined this society? I mean, it's the first I've heard.
Well, it's a new program. We've just started. We're just starting to go out. As I said a little earlier, I made my wife made a gift to it. I know that the chair of the board has made a gift to it, and it's a new program. We're just starting. So we're also interested in getting feedback from individuals like you.
Well, thank you. Well, Ned, I appreciate our time today. And, at least in our family, we always discuss these kinds of commitments. So I will take it under advisement, but I do want to speak to my husband about it and, get back to you in due time about it. I'm not going to say yes or no right now, but I do want to talk to my husband and really get his thoughts about it.
I'm sure you do, because it is, I know, a joint decision. And I know, as you pointed out, you've just now heard about it. So you're going to want to think about what our plans are. I'm going to leave you a brochure explaining it. After you've had a chance to talk to your husband, would it be possible for me to follow up in a couple of weeks and see if you have any further questions about what we've been discussing?
Well, I think that would be fine. Our son, who's been at college, just came back and is living with us, but we also may want to include him in the conversation just so he learns about philanthropy and such. What do you think about that?
I think that's a very good idea. And obviously, you're going to want to look at your will as to what you want to do in your will about leaving a donation to United Way. We want to make it simple, however, because all we need from you and your husband is really a commitment that, yes, we will leave, let's say, $250,000. You might ask, why $250,000? Well, $250,000 invested at 4% would yield the $10,000. And if you can even email us a commitment, we can then work out the paperwork.
So now I'm confused. Is the endowment, and how does that relate to a planned gift versus an outright gift?
We accept both, obviously. We'd love to have the outright gift. But the planned gift is that when you pass away, or you and your husband pass away, you can then give the money to United Way. And as you know, with your 401k or 403b, you have this deferred income, which is going to be taxed fairly heavily, and giving to charities through a vehicle like that can be very beneficial. So we would hope that you would be continuing giving your $10,000 annually, but when you're no longer able to do that, that you would fund the endowment.
I see. So it's kind of giving while living, huh?
You got it.
Well, great, Ned. I think our time is over, and thank you for coming by.
Well, thank you very much, Rochelle, and I look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks.
Wonderful.
And now I want to several things before I proceed with Rochelle. One is you want to keep listening for the ask. You want to get the donor talking. What we will tend to do when making ask is we're sort of rapid fire, want to keep talking. And if they even pause, we almost have a heart attack. But remember, when you're talking to a donor, you have to give them pauses, because like Rochelle said, she hadn't heard about it before. So her mind is processing this. What am I going to say to my husband? What am I thinking about? What's he thinking about now? So you want to allow enough pauses that she has an opportunity to process what you're saying. Now I'd like to go, I'm going to back up to where Rochelle said that she wanted to talk to her husband. And I'm going to have Rochelle now say to me that her answer is no. So you want to say, no, I don't want to.
Sure, let's cue it up. So this is 3 weeks and Ned has made the call to me and he's emailed me and I'm going to allow another 12 minutes or so. And it turns out my husband cannot join and my son, not available. So it's just me and Ned. Okay, Ned, good to see you again.
Which is very nice to see you. And I can understand why your husband and obviously your son can't join us. But I'm interested as to what do you, when you spoke with them, what were their concerns?
Well, I have to tell you honestly, my son was interested in talking about it, but really he had no knowledge or interest. He thought United Way, he just wasn't that familiar with it. And my husband really, he said, look, that this is your charity, not mine. He felt ownership about, frankly, his university versus my ownership of United Way. I'm just more community spirited, I think, in that way. To be honest, he just outright said no.
Yes, we often hear that because I think United Way, particularly when you look at workplace campaigns, have been very much focused on the employee and not on the family. And so I think we have had that kind of reaction from others. But I think that they have to understand that I think even your son, that you've been very committed, and as your husband's been giving too, for a number of years, and to perpetuate that gift to continue to at least address the issues which are so prevalent in health and human services in our community, would be nice to have them part of that legacy of continuing on your commitment. So I would ask whether you could go back maybe and discuss, I know he wants to give to his university, which he should, and there may be other charities and your son may eventually get involved in something. But I wonder if they would consider in the overall plan, would United Way, because of your very loyal commitment, would they consider including United Way too?
Well, I had thought at the time, because he was so adamant, to just drop the whole thing. But now talking to you, I think I would go back and maybe in a few months' time, when things have settled down a bit, go back and talk some more about how important this is to me. Because even if I give annually, I still want something to be there for the future. That is important to me.
Well, I think that's very good. And maybe the next time, maybe we can have lunch or something with your husband, even and your son, include them, or your lawyer to discuss how it might go. And I think that they would find respect for you, that you would like to continue your commitment as you would respect your husband's commitment that he would like to give to his university. I think it's always a family issue where each person gets what they would like. But I think United Way covers so many ground of what is important in our community. I think as you give annually, I think have you and your husband listed as perpetually concerned about our community would mean a lot to the community and a lot to, I'm sure, in the end of the family.
Well, we'll keep talking, and I know everyone thinks it's important because I did talk to a few friends and they are considering it. So, it is something for me to think more about and for us to discuss as a family.
Well, as you know, I'll keep coming back to you and we'll see each other and we'll continue our conversation. But I really appreciate your ongoing support and I hope you will give this consideration and we will continue our conversation periodically.
Thank you, Ned. We'll see you again.
Thank you very much. with that, Carol, thank you, Rochelle. You didn't, you didn't totally flummox me, let's put it that way. But this was not rehearsed in case anyone thought it was, or they probably could have figured out it wasn't. But anyway, Carol, I'm going to turn it back to you.
This is great. Thank you so much. So it is my understanding that we're asking everyone in the audience today to add to the chat, if you would, the size of your United Way. And when we say that today, we're not specifically looking at the metro size, because some of you may not know that, but how much revenue does your organization generate? If you'd be willing to put that in the chat, and with that, your experience in major gifts, endowment, and planned giving. So, you know, to keep it simple, put the revenue amount, and then, you know, are you a 1? You have, you know, 10 or more years of experience. Maybe you're a 2 and you have 5 to 3 years of experience in endowment major gifts. And maybe you have less than 2 years and you're a 3. We didn't really come up with numbers in advance, but if you have like 10 or more years of experience and you feel like you're a rock star at this, give yourself a 1. And if you're, you know, 5 or 3 to 5 years of experience, maybe it's a 2, and less than 2 years of experience in this, call yourself a 3. That'll help Rochelle and Ned kind of assess the group. And if you wouldn't mind doing that and putting it in the chat, that would be great, just to give us some of the data. So I'm going to join by adding United Way Next revenue. And I'm going to put myself as a 3 because I have limited experience with endowment and planned giving. So that's kind of how I modeled the way for this. And we also want to be able to give some time for all of you to ask questions. So as you're thinking about, you know, where you rank yourself and the generation of revenue, how much is generated for your United Way, kind of just open it up and ask. If you want to ask the question, you simply can just unmute and you know, put yourself out there, because I think this is what it's all about, is connecting within this group, your peers and the network. We want you to learn from each other, as well as, you know, share some best practices. But let's open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to ask some questions, or at least some commentary. I was really intrigued by that first comment of when the person that doubted your ability to get the $10 million gift, you politely said, sit there and smile. And I comment about that because I recently had a call with a couple local United Way CEOs who said out of the gate, this was what they said to me: we really could use some help with revenue generation, being creative and innovative. Well, you know, I'm a community impact person. I'm not a fundraiser. So I want to ask Rochelle and Ned, how would you encourage that CEO who makes that type of a statement? I have my own opinion, but I really want to hear yours.
Well, I would just say that that is the best kind of fundraiser, because in terms of impact and knowledge about what the United Way is doing, that individual is a tremendous asset. I mean, that person's an expert. So I think it's really smile away and tell the story. The ask is part of it, but certainly that individual has so much to share with that potential donor or a current donor.
Yeah, I would just add that if a CEO is not comfortable making the ask, I think the development person or someone from the board, it's more introducing the CEO to discuss the mission and why they feel so passionate about the mission. And that will come across. And then, as I said, you got to decide who's going to make the ask. It doesn't have to be the CEO making the ask. It could be a volunteer, or it could be a development person.
I'll add to that too, because those are great points, that if someone is less experienced or shy about it, it can be role played and scripted ahead of time. And the most experienced person or most comfortable person can kind of, you know, lead the discussion too and make things move smoothly. So, you know, there are all sorts of ways to really get the message across and also make a very good ask.
I love that. Thank you. I also, the other thing, since I'm not seeing any questions, so is there anybody who's got a question? We want to open it up. You're welcome to either put it in the chat or just unmute yourselves and ask away. And while we're waiting for someone to come forward with a, oh, Chris, did you unmute yourself?
I did, yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm new to this. As far as I'm in plan giving here at United Way at North Central New Mexico. And I've been, taking little nuggets of knowledge from all kinds of different resources. And one thing that stood out to me, one of the many things, Ned, in your presentation was you had no problem mentioning death. However, I've heard to never mention death. And I think it's kind of one of those things where you don't need to worry so much about it. But I just kind of wanted to get your take on that, like as far as language going into these conversations with folks.
I missed the first part of your question or your
Sorry about
I
that.
didn't hear.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. So I saw in your presentation that you had no problem talking about death and like mentioning those words like in your presentation. And I've learned from other people that you should never mention death, but I kind of like see it as like, I don't know, is it really, potatoes, tomatoes, tomatoes? And I just kind of wanted to get your take on that as far as being very frank about what planned giving is. And do you feel like, you need to tiptoe around the language on that,
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't, if I did, I wouldn't use the word, I guess I did use the word death. I would say what you're really doing as a planned gift is you want to perpetuate your giving to the community in perpetuity. And that when you stop giving to United Way, that the planned gift would perpetuate what you are giving and show the community that you continue to care. You're right. You don't want to, you shouldn't mention death, and I think I probably did, but I would not.
Yeah, to be fair, you just mentioned when you said when you pass away, and that you didn't say, hey, when you die, you said when you pass away. But it's one of those things. I don't want to get lost in the weeds, but I did want to bring it up and ask what you guys think about that.
Yeah, it's a valid question. I wouldn't use the passed away necessarily or death. It's kind of code words in terms of plan giving or legacy or the future, and endow your gift, that kind of thing. Some people are more direct about it in terms of the kind of future and what their plans are in their will, bequest. People will get very detailed sometimes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought it was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Anyone else that wants to unmute and ask or throw a question in the chat? So I wanted to just, while we're waiting for someone else to think of what's next for them, I wanted to talk a little bit about the pause. So you talked about that and how the importance of when you're making an ask and that uncomfortability when you're like, now there's silence. So can you talk a little more about that, because I think this is really important in any conversation. This isn't just about when you're asking for money. It can be in any situation that you're in, and maybe just elaborate a little bit more on that. And then I see we have a question in the chat. So we'll take that next.
Well, my answer to that is we keep forgetting that even in our own mind, we have to process something. So you only can process something because if you're, like I asked Rochelle about something she hadn't really heard about, her mind has to process that. And if I keep talking, then she's going to be trying to multitask, continue to listen to me and process, well, what's my husband going to think, or what's he really talking about? So I think the pauses, though they seem very long, to the donor, they're not as long because they are really doing some mental processing of what they've just heard from you.
I would add to that, in my experience, that a very important pause is when you actually make the ask itself and waiting. Because typically you just want to like jump right in and get an answer. It gets uncomfortable. You're like, oh my gosh. What are they going to say? And you really have to almost use some self-control and just wait. And that's something that I think is a learned kind of thing when you're talking with a potential donor or a donor. And I agree with Ned in terms of the listening and the pausing so that there is understanding. And sometimes I've even like repeated things too, just to make sure I understood what the donor's saying or the individual saying. So this is really important to you that, you know, whatever it is, and that way there's really an agreement and understanding, and the other person appreciates that you really do get them.
That's great. Thank you. Very helpful. So we have a question in the chat from Katie, and this is what it reads. What would you recommend for getting board members and donors on board and excited to join in a new endowment campaign?
I think the the problem that United Way has, I think, with a endowment campaign or some other organization, we are so annual giving oriented, almost fixated on that. The CEO says, oh, it's great to create an endowment. 20 years from now, they'll have money to do something. It's not in their job description unless someone actually puts it there. So I think one has to convince the board that to build up an endowment, particularly as we're seeing workplace campaigns, et cetera, decline, or as we saw in our United Way, when we got into the pandemic, we were able to use some of the money from our endowment to support organizations that were about ready to go out of business. I think you have to demonstrate why this endowment is the only way that you can perpetuate that and sustain these ebbs and flows in annual giving.
I mean, I'll share a story in terms of when I in my first week on a job, the major donor passed away and there was no endowed gift, right? And this was the organization's biggest donor. So in reality, endowed gifts are really critical in terms of the longevity of the organization if something happens. And as Ned has been saying, some, you know, regular funding that the organization can depend on. So I think having the long-term view is important to an organization, and for donors and certainly for community leaders that want to see something build over time and get results over time, then it's something to really see something happen over time. Not everything I see in the chat in terms of, yeah, some people want to see immediate results, but I think what Ned was pointing out is that we want to do both. In other words, we want to have the immediate needs met, but also plan for the future. You know, in your own kind of financial planning, you want to have some, you know, funding for a rainy day, right? And so in the organization's kind of financial planning, you want to make sure that there is not just a reserve, but really an endowment so that it can perpetuate the organization and meet current needs, because endowments do meet current needs.
Very helpful. Katie, I hope that answered your question. And if there's anything additional you want to elaborate on, you just let us know in the chat, okay? There's another question from Tammy White. And Tammy wrote, when you involve a volunteer in the meeting, in the meeting and the ask with the prospect donor, prospect or the donor, is it important that they already have committed to what you're asking? I'm sorry, I'm reading this and it's not making sense to me. When you involve a volunteer in the
Would you
meeting.
like me to just go ahead and ask it?
Yes, thank you.
So my question is, so we're going to be 100 years old in 2025. So we are embarking on a $20 million campaign, which will be in addition to our annual campaign. And we're kind of in what we'll call the quiet phase. And so we have our list of lead donors where we're going to ask them to make significant gifts, $1 million or more. And my question is, as we enlist some volunteers and donors to support us in having meetings, is it important to have people who have already made a similar commitment? And not somebody, who's not made a commitment. Does that make sense? Am I making sense on this late day?
Yeah. I know what you're saying. I think the answer is yes, they have to make a commitment, but I can ask someone for $1 million gift and not give $1 million myself. But if I've made whatever I'm asking for, if I've made no commitment or the volunteers made no commitment, it isn't going to work.
Thank you.
They're not going to be real.
Yeah.
Got it.
In my experience, the best thing is if the individual has made a similar gift, because it's kind of, they're in the same ballpark, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But sometimes, again, exceptions can be made, right? Let's say someone obviously is not at that same level in terms of potential giving, but is totally highly respected in the community, is a real leader, and, is so well liked. There are advantages to including that type of individual too. So some of it, Tammy, is really the judgment, right? Of who's going to be best, who's going to be best at the table with that particular donor, right? Who are they going to respond to? For one person, it's going to be someone who's made the biggest gift. Another person, it might be someone that they've known for, 20 years. They really admire.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. And I'm sorry, I apologize if that came across like I was confused. I just was stumbling over my words and I felt like I lost track of where I was. So.
No, it's okay. I just typed it in while you were talking about other things, and it was just easier for me to ask it. So no problem, Carol.
Thank you so much. There is another question in the chat. And I apologize, I'm not sure how to say your first name. Shimaji.
It's Shemaine, like champagne.
Oh, champagne. Yes, I got it. Shemaine. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Thank you both. This is really helpful. Wonderful. I said, how does one talk with younger people about options for long-term impact? How is the approach different?
I think the approach is different in many ways, in terms of from the beginning of how you get the meeting, let's say, that can be very different. The networks that individual is in, who's making the ask, etc. And in terms of long-term impact, I have found that some younger people really are very future-minded. They're concerned about the future. And I think the long-term impact is important, frankly, to younger people and older people as well, because the younger people are going to be living in it longer. But I think the methodologies are different, for obvious reasons in terms of the tech and whatnot.
And I think if we're talking about planned giving and endowment, younger people really shouldn't be your target audience. It's the people who have been loyal donors to your United Way, who probably are over 55.
Great. We have time really for one more question. If there's anyone who didn't get to ask, I just want to be mindful. We're getting it. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but we're about out of time. But the only comment I wanted to make, and I think Ned and Rochelle did a great job, but to kind of go along with what Ned said and also Chris's question, I guess, is that, I think we live in this world, so we can throw terms around like endowment and perpetuate and those kind of things, we know what those mean, but I think to a lot of our donors, they don't. And, so I really kind of just try to keep it very basic, in the discussions we have, and then answer any questions that they may have. But even, as Ned said, we kind of live in a world where our basic business model is the annual gift. They've never thought about leaving a planned gift to us. And so, just kind of, I approach the donors when I talk to them, at least the first time, I'm not asking you for a gift today, but a gift after you pass. Because I think if we don't at least, and we don't want to say die or death or some of those, but we want to make sure we're clear that this is a gift coming out of your estate after you're no longer with us. So.
Great
That's
point.
it.
I want to go back to one last point, and that is that there are definitely tax implications for these types of gifts too. And that's important in terms of young or older individuals, et cetera. But I agree with Mike in terms of keeping the language straightforward and really understandable in terms of, what are these terms? What is an endowment? Some people, clearly have not been involved with them. So, I think starting with real basics of why and what the impact is very important. So thank you for bringing that point up, Mike.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Well, we are at the end of the hour, and I first want to just start by saying thanks to each of you for joining us today and being a part of the session. These sessions are so much more valuable when you're there and you're engaged and asking questions. So to all of you who asked, thanks. And to our guest speakers today, Ned Montgomery and Rochelle Zeidman, for your generosity of time and all that you poured into this. Behind the scenes, there's always lots of hours put into these presentations that we don't always see. And of course, to Caitlin Guest from our team for all that she does to help support the events, especially our planned giving learning sessions. Our next one is coming up in September. You can go to our website, check out the events. There's a lot of activities coming up for United Way next July through September. And we invite you to join us for any of the sessions that you see. And we look forward to seeing you around. So if there's something we can do to support you in this journey, please don't hesitate to ask. We will send out a follow-up email with the recording link and encourage you to share that with your peers. We'll also include the slide deck. And at the end of the slide deck, there's actually some tips we didn't have time to share today. And an additional one-page document that kind of outlines what United Way Next is doing to support local United Ways across the country. So if you're really on the cusp of a 100-year campaign and you're like, gee, I could benefit from talking to like a trusted advisor, someone who could just lean into me for 2 or 3 hours in the next few months, we've got people standing at the ready to support you. So feel free to email me. And I will put that in the chat just so you all have it at your fingertips, but you can obviously reach out to Caitlin because you've got her email and she'll pass along any information to me as well. So thank you all for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you around. Thank you, Ned and Rochelle as well.
Thank you.